On episode 214 of the Tennis Files podcast, you'll learn how to develop a great base of tennis fundamentals with Coach Steve Smith. Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. This is Mirban, and I'm back with another interview. This one is a long but very good one with Coach Steve Smith, and Steve co-founded the Great Base Tennis Player Development System, which comprises a complete system of player development that emphasizes character, learning, and self-discipline. Coach Smith has coached tennis for over 48 years, and he spent many years learning and coaching under tennis legends Vic Braden, Welby Van Horn, Dennis Vandermeer, and others. And Steve also co-hosts the Great Base Tennis podcast with Andy Fitzell. And I have listened to the Great Base Tennis podcast, and it is a very good podcast, one that will help you learn how to improve different facets of your game. And I've heard ones where they dive deep into the principles of certain instructors, including, of course, Vic Braden, which, as you'll hear, is one of the cornerstones of the Great Base Tennis Player System. So I think you'll definitely enjoy this one. And like I mentioned, it's very substantial in length, so we should just jump straight into it. So without further ado, here is my interview with Coach Steve Smith. Buddy, this is Mirban, and welcome to this episode of the Tennis Files podcast. It's really a pleasure to have on Coach Steve Smith from Great Base Tennis podcast on. He does a lot of great work with his co-host and co-founder Andy Fitzell on, not just the podcast, but also just developing a great system to help tennis players really evolve and improve their game. So, Steve, thanks a lot for coming on, and great to speak with you.
Mirban, great to speak with you. Look forward to it.
Yeah, same here, Steve. And I was doing some research on your system, Great Base Tennis, and it was very interesting to see the different influences that obviously has helped you and your team structure, what Great Base Tennis is all about. But can you, first of all, just kind of describe your system and your philosophy of teaching the game?
Well, we always mention Vic Braden, the late Vic Braden. Everybody should have a written philosophy, but it really is physics. It's, striking a tennis ball comes down to physics. But with philosophy, our system is really a system of systems. We define a system as an organized plan. We have 8 pillars. We do have a course that's about 15 years old called Tennis Intelligence Applied. It's 25 hours. Approximately within that, we've mentioned over 100 coaches. Like, consider ourselves lifelong learners. But it's a system of systems. That's where I think one of our coaches mentions a theme: tennis, Back to the Future, the movie. So I think old school, new school, in tennis teaching, there is no school. So there's a lot of history to what we do, a lot of validity. It's not opinionated. It's really fact-based for long-term development.
Nice, Steve. And let's get into Vic Braden. I mean, I personally really enjoyed just watching his old videos on YouTube and things like that. And actually, it's very interesting because it mentioned that on the website that you had these in-depth apprenticeships with various different great instructors. So what was it like being coaching and learning from Vic Braden?
Wow. I mean, that's probably the best word to sum it up, is just wow. For me, I'm a product of the tennis boom. And Braden came into everybody's living room. Once the tiebreaker was put in place, tennis could be put on TV. Before that, Mirban, the scores of a set could be 22-20. So the tennis just could not be packaged for television. So Vic used to do these PBS commercials. It wasn't really a commercial. It was what did they do in between changeovers? And then his book came out in 77. Even before that, in 75, I always tell a story that I volunteered. I was a perennial tennis bum at Boca Raton, Florida, and I volunteered in the mall, Boca Mall, to show a video called Go for a Winner. It's about mixed doubles, but every principle applies to doubles as well. And so I listened to that tape over and over again, and I think I was very fortunate at that point that I realized that Vic was not just the little short, fat, funny guy, as he would call himself, that, he just had information. And I would say to this day, there was an article in Sports Illustrated, May 10th, 1976. Tennis is in the Stone Ages. And in a lot of ways, it still is. Unfortunately, it's progressed. I mean, the technology with a racket, for example, but I don't think the technology on how we teach basics has improved very much. So my older brother told me, what you need to do is surround yourself by people who know more than you. So I took the role of the starving artist, and I found a way to, I was a volunteer at first. And then from there, I worked nights, went out to California, but then I was very privileged to do many things in Europe and here in the US with Vic. But it was just fantastic to be one of his disciples.
Yeah, for sure. And it was an interesting story to read, because I read that you lived in your van and bartended at nights while trying to work for him. So pretty neat stuff.
The van didn't have a shower, so we had to illegally jump in a pool. Back at that time, bartending, all the smoke, so it's just pretty good idea to jump into a chlorine pool after you've been bartending.
Yeah, definitely a good idea.
It was just at that time where the Vietnam War had come to an end, and I withdrew from school. I later went back to school, but adventurous in many ways. I think of people like, say, Cliff Richey, who a great tennis player. He's one of the few Americans that didn't stay in school. So I went through the school of hard knocks. I kind of created my own tennis school. I had basically no background in tennis. When I grew up, I thought tennis was a great place to play street hockey. I grew up 12 miles from the Canadian border. But my older brother had studied hockey systems, and my parents got me a job before I went off to an exclusive prep school, expensive prep school, washing dishes in a boys camp in the Adirondack Mountains. And I just started banging tennis balls against a backboard. So I didn't really learn tennis through osmosis. I was 19 years old. And, the more I read, the more I observed, a lot of kids, unfortunately, get very emotional about it. Beginner adults, they get a bad start. It's the tennis profession is very unregulated. 2 + 2 pretty much equals whatever you want it to be. It's really an engineering concept to hit a tennis ball. It shouldn't really be based on guesswork.
Yeah, that's interesting. You said that tennis isn't, it should be more regulated. So how, in what ways would you regulate, the coaching and teaching of tennis?
Well, parents are blindly, I spent so much time in junior tennis. I've done quite a bit in adult tennis, but we train tennis teachers, we train goal-oriented players. And with that, I think a recreation base and a competitive base are really one and the same. It's just a different pace. But to regulate tennis, the consumer simply needs consumer knowledge. They're blindly writing checks. For the most part, the coach doesn't have, I sound doom and gloom, but they don't have product knowledge. If there was product knowledge, there'd be a product, and you would see efficient serves. You would see kids coming to the net. People would know how to volley. I said the other day on a podcast with the Intercollegiate Tennis Association, I do think everybody picks on the USTA, the governing body of tennis here in America. But many great people, many great causes, but they spend so much money at the top on player development. I think that money could just be changed, and they do it with umpires. They have experts in officiating that go to all the tournaments, and they observe, and they coach, they regulate. And for example, who's going to be good enough to go to the U.S. Open? To become an umpire for years and years, I went through the program 10 years in a row because I set this program up where you get a 2-year degree. And one of the weekends was to become an umpire. And you can become an umpire. It's an open book test. And then after you complete that open book test, you can go out and work junior tournaments. But the USTA doesn't do that. But I think really it would come down to educating the consumer. I don't think we do a very good job on TV. Again, growing up in ice hockey, when I was a kid, there was a gentleman by the name of Howie Meeker, and in between periods, they would be teaching aspects of the game. I don't think that people really learn that much by watching tennis on television. I do think that there's two types of talk. There's fact finding, and then there's bleacher talk. And who's training with who, and who's going where, and who's based at what academy. But I don't think it's so much about the nuts and bolts. I mean, Roger Federer, for example, are we really told the nuts and bolts of why he is so good? I don't think so.
Yeah, good stuff, Steve. So I want to go back to Vic just for a moment, and I want to ask you. Obviously, like we talked about, a legend of the sport. What are a few key lessons that you learned that at the time it was kind of like transformative? That something you necessarily didn't think that was true, or just a new concept?
Well, Vic, I think he was known as again, great presentation. He was so funny. He could have been a professional comedian. But anything that can be measured can be improved. He was a myth buster, but the myths are still there. I mean, maybe in the 70s and 80s when he was more of a superstar of tennis and on television and doing clips, and he had 2 different TV series. But come over the ball, come under the ball, stay down, toss high for more time, arch your back, stop for more control. The myths are abundant. So I would think that would be one for sure. Using film, knowing the pros and cons. I mean, certainly you can tell quite a bit with the naked eye, but the human eye sees 24 frames per second related to camera. So to actually slow it down. I think also too, is that Vic was one to say, no, I was wrong doing this. For example, like with Tracy Austin, who became such a great player, and he had so much to do with the entire Austin family. Gene Austin ran the pro shop at the Kramer Club, and 5 in the family. Tracy's the youngest. But I remember Vic saying that he didn't really understand the serve when he was teaching Tracy. He was just looking to find a better way. Just a little pearl of wisdom here, a little pearl of wisdom there. But I would say it's really, you put science in the forefront. Even though he was a self-made biomechanist by formal study, he was a psychologist.
Yeah, Steve, you mentioned quite a few actually there, technical wise, I think mainly. But so there's one I still hear quite a bit, which is like, oh, you need to toss higher. So can you talk a bit more about that one?
Vic had a lot of Maribon, a lot of ways to say things. When you toss high, you have more time to be crummy. You have more time for extra movement. To be efficient, Efficiency is the economy of motion, least amount of moving parts, least amount of muscle recruitment. What you really need to do is program your swing. I think bring history into it. If you know your subject, you know history. That's where the great legendary Bobby Riggs would play people blindfolded for money. Every other game, he'd say, oh, we're blindfolded, and that's when he was going to serve. You ask your group of people, take a survey, what's more important, the toss or the swing? And it's almost 100% people are going to say the toss. But the riddle is the racket find the toss, is the toss find the racket. You really need to program the swing so the toss finds the racket. You know, when you start tossing overhead, people misinterpret what the pros are doing. Think back about someone like, say, Stefan Edberg. Now, it was like he had 2 great second serves. So, but how much did a player like that coil his body to the right? And then people think that they're actually arching their back more than they are. So you always have to take a second look and film from different angles. With Vic, he would film from an aerial shot. It was called a cherry picker to look down. But you think of the history of the game. Les Stofan, back in the 30s, his son was on Vic's staff when I was. And it was a sculptor who wanted, the elbow down, what you see with the pointing with the left hand. It's something that's changed in this country for sure. Not that many kids, or not as many kids, played baseball. Even at one point in America, if you didn't play baseball, you could still throw baseball. So the throwing motion, the old baseball trick, we put 3 balls in a sock. The baseball weighs about 6 ounces, a little more. Tennis ball, 2 ounces. So you put 3 balls in a sock. And you go out and throw old rackets. So they really programmed the swing. It's amazing. Years ago, Maribon kids would come to a tennis camp. They could throw a baseball, but then they would be taught down together, up together, scratch the back. And that momentum of going down and you go back up, that's where the toss is very high. But it's a common sense notion. It just makes sense. Toss high for more time. And you have more time for extra movements.
Yeah, I really love that philosophy of just reminding yourself that the toss needs to find the racket. Are there any other particular areas on the serve that you find amateurs mess up the most besides, talking about that we need to develop the throwing motion itself? Any areas that you've seen?
Well, tennis, both an upper body sport and lower body sport, you have to really coordinate. Again, brush your teeth, salute, comb your hair, have the palm down. With, I think, the pinpoint versus the platform stance. If a kid has a palm up serve and you start talking about pinpoint stance, that's pretty much like the sailboat's got a hole in it and you're putting the sail up. You really, you have to take care of the priority, the primary flaw. So I think that you'll hear more and more people saying that the serve is from the legs and people go up and down like an elevator. You do have to have a ground reaction force, stabilize yourself to the ground. And it's the uncoiling, it's the energy coming up through your legs. But it's uncoiling, it's not jumping. It looks like people are jumping into the serve. And I think it's very dangerous for young kids to be copycats, to look at YouTube clips. And I think that that's something that's really hurting tennis. Kids look at highlight tapes. Andy Fitzell has done a great job over the last 2 years with putting up short Instagram posts. And from a biomechanical standpoint, the pros are far more similarities than are differences. If you just film right at the contact point, the pros can't violate physical laws. For years, Andy Roddick would be asked, how do you serve so big? And he would say, well, I really don't know. Now, I've heard him say the legs, it's all in the legs. When he was a young kid, we have a film of it where his mother said his serve was pitiful. He had to regress palm up. So you go down together, up together, and the racket's on edge. When the shoulder goes forward, action, reaction, and the arm goes back and palm up, a palm up position. Granted, he had the heart of a lion and so many other positives, the intangibles. But really on his own, he was working with Stan Bostard at the time, but he just was out here frustrated. He put the racket like this, and then he had the abbreviated service motion. But when you watch Andy hit, he had all of his own idiosyncrasies, gyrations. But at the impact point, his toss was 4.5 feet into the court, way out in front, power line, all the energy at the impact point. Now, most people, when they hit, they have two forces that are going in directions that are counterproductive. They're going left and they're bending backwards. There's a lot of reasons for that. The brain's a fifth second ahead of the hand, so people sneak a peek. And then when the eyes go, the head goes. And the brain can make all the computations. The brain's very sophisticated to make the adjustments to get the serve in, but that's why your serve goes 72 instead of 92. The serve is huge. I'd like to tell people that the serve comes from the time where tennis was a garden party and the servant put the ball in play. But now, we have tennis players. Everybody knows John Isners is a great guy. He's so popular, so well liked. But John is playing one-up, one-back doubles. Can you imagine Sam Query's? We were watching Kevin Anderson practice last night. People just dropping bombs and not going to the net. But that comes from, I think, how tennis has evolved, where in this country, the U.S., at one point, you couldn't be ranked until you're 13 years old. Now somebody's 13 years old and they've played a lot of competitive tennis and they're programmed. It's quite, as you know, Mirabon, it's quite common to go to a junior tournament and you don't see, you could be there, say it's a group of 12 and under kids. You won't see one overhead. Mm-hmm. It's just tragic. We actually one time incognito right here where we're staying, it's very close to the Delray Beach Stadium where the 12 and unders were held. And one of our students was the director of tennis at that time. So we had a small group and no one knew what we were doing. And we didn't exploit it. No one saw the tape, just film players from behind. But we filmed 50 boys and 50 girls on their serve. And over 90% had some version of palm up. And this is national 12s. So if they're serving that way when they're 12, it's a pretty good idea that they're going to serve that way when they're 13, 14. Instead of people making the right change with the service motion, if someone has the racket in the palm up position like this, typically what they do, a right-hander, they'll just toss to the left. They go like this. So now they can hit some spin, but they can't hit much speed. And it all comes back to the prevention of injury. Next thing you know, they get older and they've got to go see the chiropractor.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. A lot of great insight. Again, on the serve, one of my favorite topics, just because it's such a complex stroke, even though we don't have to really move to the ball or anything. But in terms of the palm up issue, I mean, I've had that myself in the past. Like, is it as simple as just saying, turn your palm down, or are there any other things that are causing it? Because I see it a ton in amateur play. So what's the solution?
Well, 85% of players throughout their whole career, I think about recreational players, have some version of palm up. Actually, yesterday we were over at Rick Macy's tennis center, and he was giving a tennis lesson. It's logical, intelligent to start to turn the palm up. And where that comes from is when they're younger, players first start out, they want to get the ball in the box. So they swing straight towards the target and they think they can hit down. So they put the racket face up. When the racket faces up, the racket path comes down. But no, for sure, that's where our history of having studied all these tennis teachers, like say Dennis Vandermeer, he was great with corrective measures. To have a person come up and hit on the wrong side of the racket, to put the racket on your head instead of the scratch the back position, put your racket in the salute position, make this movement 1, 2, 3. When I talk about swinging a sock, actually, and then talk about low toss, is that you have to bend and then twist up. Peter Burwash was very clever with the serve. What he would do is have people serve backwards. And you have to hit that shot. We call it when you're running backwards, Ili Nastasi, the backfire like this. The Bucharest backfire came from Bud Collins. Mm-hmm. So we even started one of our mini tennis games, Mini Tennis 5, where you actually have to put the ball and play this way. We don't want to have someone walk back and give it one of these numbers. So to have people not even look towards the target, because when you hit a serve or an overhead is just abbreviated serve, you swing, you're blind to your target on all shots, but serves and overheads, you swing away from your target. If you're right-handed, you're swinging left to right. So it's very difficult to conceptualize that. It doesn't make sense for young players when they're first playing. Like a wheelchair player, Maribon, they're going to put their chair at a 45-degree angle. They're going to stop a right-hander. They're going to stop the wheel with their left hand so they can decelerate to the left side, keep the body at a 45-degree angle, and then the edge goes up this way. But with a Continental grip, the strings face your target. So these people, it is this really grip swing body that if you make an adjustment with the grip, you have to make an adjustment with the swing in the body. So you need the accommodating information. So that's where you can't really teach based on guesswork. You have to be able to recognize the primary flaw, but with one flaw, there's a counter flaw. So it is like knocking over dominoes. I think it's great to have architects say, well, this should be the design of tennis. This is what we should do to promote tennis, build tennis. But you still have to have people that have pounded nails. And Vic used to always say, if you can change someone from palm down to palm up, you truly can teach tennis. I remember being one time at a place, at an academy, and had a very bright, scholarly student assistant, and they're watching 3 private lessons, and they're all serving. And I said, it's just money. If you go and you listen, it's money. It's dollars, donuts that they won't even recognize that flaw. But it's unfortunate because parents, their child will go through down. We always, when people say, how's my child doing? And say, well, the light at the end of the tunnel is the train coming right at them because they have to change. But they play year after year. Before we get on the podcast with you, we were watching a doubles Austin Krajicek. So Austin was 7. He had to totally change his game. We have all that documented on film. Granted, there's so many chapters to a player's story like that, but yeah, so we go back to his film. He was a palm upper, and it's like you have to take time away from competition. It's kind of like a dog can't swim. Dog does the doggy paddle. But, if you're going to swim the American crawl, you have to change your mechanics. But then the brain's programmed. So to deprogram, reprogram, but then the kid wants to win, and ego kills. So it really should be, winning is a byproduct of skills. Today, And I go back to one interesting fact in World War II, Americans were throwing grenades, where the Germans were taking a grenade and putting it on like an 8-10 inch metal rod, and they're going like this, and sometimes they're going whoops. So, and how accurate somebody can be, just going out, throwing a baseball, throwing a football. Years ago, even I wasn't a baseball player. I mean, I played baseball. I mean, I remember being a kid and telling my mother I just want to play street hockey during summer baseball. And she said, no, it's un-American not to play baseball. But today, and, kids do get picked on, how much screen time they have per day. And, a lot of young kids, they can't even throw and catch. I'm always trying to explain to people a great game called baseball tennis or softball tennis. So 2 8-year-olds playing, they can kick a soccer ball back and forth or pass a basketball back and forth, but can they actually rally? And then even when they do serve, we should be more clever in how we teach little kid tennis. The little kids should be able to stand in the middle of the baseline and just serve anywhere in the court. And maybe the rule should be where they got to serve from this position, because it just, you want to be told that you're doing it the wrong way. And the sooner you're told you're doing it inefficiently, the better. But most of the time, people don't know. Winning is confusing. We always say it's not confusing. It's totally confusing. If you're playing somebody on the other side of the net, then you're being measured versus that person on the other side of the net. It's not like you're being measured by a stopwatch or measuring stick.
Oh, well, a lot of great stuff there. I think I'm going to go on the court next time and hit some backward serves. I do agree that, once you look at a court, then your whole mindset shifts to getting that ball in. And also like kind of, I guess, extracting another drill from that is you probably would say that players who are having trouble with the palm up, they can just kind of start their racket at that salute position essentially, and then just serve from there. Would that be a good drill?
You want to be careful using progressions for too long. You want to explain to the learner, because if it takes the brain about 10 minutes to program for a task, the speed of that actually has nothing to do with power supply. So you can serve from that position, but the serve goes 450 degrees. It goes 90 this way, 180, another 180. So you actually can be cutting off racket at speed. Years ago, people used to pick on Jay Berger, who became a top 10 player in the world.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't have that fluid, continuous motion. Even Agassi and Sharapova at one time did that as a corrective measure. Roddick simply stayed with it because he was the best American for a decade, number one. And he was one of the best servers at that time. I think a lot of people tried to copy that unsuccessfully. You can have abbreviated serve, but there's a lot of other factors involved versus just at one point. There's so many points with all strokes.
Yeah, definitely, Steve. So you did touch upon, doubles formations and how to play that. So I'm curious, and kind of taking looking at it from the lens of club level players, which you actually did a great podcast on doubles somewhat recently, I think maybe, but if players are, primarily have ground strokes as their strengths, I mean, in that case, would you still advocate for a 1-up, 1-back situation or 2-back, or is it still like we need to get to the net?
No, you have to go to the net. You have to go to the net with too much emphasis on who's going to win the 2-inch trophy. You just think the Bryan brothers, now that they've retired, serve and volley doubles is becoming a lost art. 2 of the last 3 years I was at the NCAAs, and it's pretty common now for the NCAAs at best. We're talking Power 5 conference top teams have one of the three teams are coming forward with, same thing with freshmen in high school, freshmen in college. If someone is in grade 9 and they play 1-up, 1-back, they're programming, they're conditioning, it's habit forming, and that's what they're going to do when they're sophomore. And then what happens is the ground strokes are better than the volleys. So people really aren't thinking of going forward. It's like the Williams sisters, when they first came on the tour, Billie Jean King, and certainly she had the credibility position to say, what are you doing? You need to go forward more. So they're superior athletes in doubles when they first came on the scene. They don't play as much doubles now, but they were superior athletes playing an inferior system. So that just comes back to just because you won. We were just watching Stevie Johnson play with Austin prior to this podcast, and Stevie's a great tennis player. He's the most decorated college tennis player of all time. Now, granted, he played 4 years. So like a McEnroe, a Connors, they only played 1 year. But, I mean, they're serving to the backhand every time. And he's lobbing off most backhands. I think what happens is Stevie Johnson's a great, great tennis player. I mean, I think he's been top 30 in the world. But if you're watching, if that was other sports, people would be very, very critical. But I do think that we have too much of the awe factor. But he's going with what he's got. So we're not really criticizing Stevie. He's in the finals of Cincinnati. So, okay, hats off to Stevie Johnson. Or just like I said earlier, John Isner, 7 feet tall, close to it, serve in from a tree, 130 plus, and he's staying back. His coach, Manny Diaz at Georgia, said to me, because if he had a better backhand volley, if he had the backhand volley that Welby Van Horn taught, he'd have millions more in the bank. So I do think that we get a little bit starstruck looking at the very best players. And that's going to be typical of a kid. Like, well, they play one up, one back. But if you were to look at the legends of the game, like say Johnny Mack, McEnroe, or Naratilova, they both could play. They proved that they could play on the WTA, ATP circuits respectfully, almost 50 years of age. Well, that's a compliment to them, but that's not really a compliment to the tour. You go out to the $15,000, $25,000 tournaments now, Maribon, and sometimes in a pro match. It's a first level, the lowest level of pro tennis, but players are not even warming up at the net. I mean, it's really tragic. It's really mind-boggling. I repeat myself with Sampras. The last time he came to the net, an official match, came 104 times. But he didn't influence tennis because, say, a 10-year-old, the kid wants to win, the parent of the kid, parents, the coaches, everybody wants to win. Like the sport I grew up in, if you really couldn't skate, you couldn't play. So in other sports are just by circumstance are taught much better than tennis. Style, almost anything goes in tennis.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the perspective and advice on that, because it was interesting to me. I think it was maybe 3 years ago or so at the City Open, I was doing some media stuff and I interviewed Dennis Kudla and Francis Tiafoe. And obviously, they're not like top doubles players or anything, but, I asked Dennis about the one up, one back, because I was a little surprised. And he said, oh yeah, the tech today and ground strokes are big, like, it works. But obviously if you look to some of the best of all time, like they're just going to the net.
Craig O'Shaughnessy has an article out called "The Big Lie." Just the other day, talking to Jeremy Wertzman, who's a coach at the University of Indiana, and he's a former student of mine. And someone who looks at our course, Tennis Intelligence Applied, you can see how he volleyed as an 11-year-old and how he changed it. And, at one time he was ranked number 1 in college tennis. Now, he didn't become a household name, but he was rereading Braden's book, and he goes, "It's all in here." It's like with what O'Shaughnessy is saying, Bill Jacobson said in the 80s. So I do think with tennis analytics, it's getting better. People are more in tune with numbers. But the real true analytics are, what are the numbers for the grip? What are the numbers for the shape of the swing? I mean, every time you turn your hand one bevel, the racket changes 45 degrees. So you turn the racket 8 times, it's 360 degrees. Most people teaching tennis don't know that. And Andy and I were talking about, we don't want to come across in an egotistical manner, but you just don't know. In our world, if you don't know that, you don't know the grips. And then say how far does the racket head get below the ball? Even the term inside out means to swing away from your body. And it's not that anyone's wrong. Players, commentators, inside out, outside in, inside inside. That's related to tactics. But I think the listener at home, and there's another thing too, it's just so easy to become a tennis teacher. Here in Florida, we have the Car Trunk Pros, but I'm a member of the USPTA PTR. I have been for 40 years. I was a tester. But basically $200 in a weekend and you're certified. But certification doesn't mean education. And I think the young people today, not to beat up young people, but like for myself, to find a way. I withdrew from school. I later went back to school, but I found a way. You could volunteer and you can work for free. I think what happens way too many times, I think really a tennis teacher should teach for 3 years as a volunteer. They should apprentice under, say, a master pro. And I don't mean a master pro of the PTR or USPTA, a master pro, because you can actually apply to be a master pro. It's, and again, not to beat up the USPTA PTR, but it's not like a nursing license. It's more like a membership to a fraternity. You sign up, and if you're proactive, you can do great things with both organizations. I would encourage everyone to be a member. I'd encourage people to be in this country a member of both. But yeah.
Yeah. Interesting thoughts there. Definitely more needs to be done, but I'm curious, when the comment about Manny Diaz saying that John Isner, if he had a better backhand volley, he could have made a lot more money. I'm not sure how much you've analyzed John Isner's volleys, but I'm curious, is there something technically that he's doing that's a little off, or if you don't know that, just generally backhand volleys, what the issue is with that?
I one time made a video, and Mike Sell, who was coaching him at the time, came up and said, "I saw your video." And I went, "Uh-oh." He goes, "No, it was 100% right." He's been a top 10 player in the world. He now is the best American. So it's not to badmouth John Isner by any means, but it really comes down to grip determines the angle of the racket face. The angle of the racket face determines the angle of the racket path. You have to have the left elbow up. But someone like Welby, John, I've met people who coached him in juniors, people who coached him and Manny as a college person. Manny was taught to play by Welby Van. I was taught to teach by Welby. But Welby, the first 3 lessons, you won't even hit a ball. And after each half-hour lesson, you take a half-hour lesson a week, you'd shadow swing in front of the pro shop window. But there was no rush. It was playing mini tennis. And back in the day, mini tennis was service line to service line and just hit the ball softly. I think the red ball, the orange ball, the green dot ball, they're great training tools. But really, I think it's an insult to people who study tennis or people certainly older, my senior, that all kids played mini tennis years ago. Now kids are programmed out, lessoned out, because we actually produce better players in America when kids just took 1 lesson a week, kind of like how people learn to play piano. They were calling people up, doing baskets. So no, it's not that it's wrong how Isner volleys, but and for him to change, that's a whole different topic. The horse is out of the barn. It's like one time Agassi said about Roddick on TV. He goes, "Oh, I'd die for his serve." And they said, "What about his forehand?" He said, No, it's too complicated. It takes him too long to get the racket in the pocket." Then Agassi, I love to listen to Agassi. Agassi was asked about Roddick's backhand because he has the racket below the wrist, and the color commentator, the 2 people in the booth, the second person talking to Agassi said, "Well, would you change it?" And he said, "No, the horse has been out of the barn too long." I think it's even like with a kid's a senior in high school and they're the top 10 in the country. I think it's more artistic to work within the player's game than to change their game. So for us, a great base is just solid fundamentals, and we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves. It's something that would help every level of play. But typically kids don't get a great beginning. Like say one myth of many is there's no time to change grips. And actually you volley with a continental grip. A true continental grip opens the racket face at a 45-degree angle. A composite grip that's between the second and third panel, the base knuckle of your index finger and your heel pad, used to be called the Australian grip. And if you look back at the great Australians, it's like Jose Garris calls it almost a continental grip. So if people were really listen, but most people say, no, you volley with a continental grip. And, this is the Continental family, and all these shots are hit with a Continental. All the emergency shots where the ball's hit behind you, from the serve and the overhead. But, one of our students who hits the ball really well on the backhand volley is Raven Clausen. He spent almost 5 years with us rebuilding his game. And wow. You just change your grip this much. Now you can drive your volley. But most people, they have to finesse volleys. I think of Sam Querrey, a great player. I remember telling Paul Roeder years ago, he's back with the USTA on the educational side, is you just don't want the players of the future volleying inefficiently. But really, when it comes down to it, many times they don't even volley. They're going for the $100 shot from the 10-cent position. Coming back to O'Shaughnessy, the big lie, if you go to the net, you win 2 out of 3, it turns into 4 out of 6, 8 out of 12, 16 out of 24. If you win 2 out of 3, you win 6-0, 6-0. So what happens is people win with a mediocre system, where kids are in the early ages, they're avoiding the net. A little kid goes to the net to lose at a faster rate. So really a kid, Roger Federer, a kid is much better off to play multiple sports and just teach him to play off, certainly you get on a tennis court, but you can teach people how to have great technique in the basement, the garage. And winning's a drug. I mean, people love to win. And what actually yesterday watching some girls play at the UTR event, Vic Braden used to say, you might as well mail in the scores. If one baseline player is a little better than the other baseline player, they don't have options. Just the way Roger Federer returns in the ready position, he has an option to do many things, like, say, for example, on the forehand. Or if people were to look at Djokovic, I mean, it looks like he just worships, he admires the ready position. Most kids, they have an extreme grip and they don't have the ready position. So when they turn, the troubles begin because they don't have a ready position. And I think what happens is it doesn't take place in other sports where you outgrow basics. But there's many things, like a basketball player, the target regulates a person just being at the foul line and having a palm go towards the target. Tennis players don't even know where their target is. Bradenism, people that study our content, the dimensions of the court and physical laws dictate stroke production. No coach's opinion, any unique theory. People need to know that behind the baseline, you have less than 20 degrees. Then as you go closer to the fence, I mean, the court is 3 feet short of being 3 times longer than it's wide. You should have the shape of your swing should match the shape of the court. But and I think really what we try to do is dummy it down. Like, it's not, like, oh, that sounds so high tech. It's not. The kids can clearly understand, but you have to know there's the academic side, there's a clinical side. Say, for example, on the forehand, in the right-hand corner, you go to the baseline, you point down the line or the racket, like a school teacher would point, say, close your eyes. Vic used to do this in every clinic. Close your eyes, and then people point to the second court. They point to the side fence. They don't really know the court's less than 20 degrees wide. They think the tennis court's gigantic because they're target oriented. They need to know their targets, but they have to also be contact oriented. So there's all these building blocks, and granted, if you're out there in early childhood development class, you don't have to get into too much complicated information. But if you make a contest of just drop hitting balls in the alley's 4.5 feet. The alley's a sidewalk. Braden used to say, okay, you got a down the line sidewalk and a cross court sidewalk, and the path of the racket should follow the sidewalk. And you want to have a long hitting zone. I'd say one of the biggest problems in tennis right now is everybody's hung up on the forehand, and they're mistaking the recovery as the follow through. You can't see the follow through with the human eye. For your listeners, we always tell people, go to YouTube, plug in Borg Federer forehand comparison, and they look identical basically. But there's a reason that players recover by pulling their left elbow to pull their right hip. But Federer is almost 4.5 feet out to his target on the forehand side, where the racket tracks out towards the target. So you hear this lag and snap, and it's like, please, but at the same time, coming back to one of your first questions, I do think it is unfortunate that a lot of people, we're giving out information online, but I think that there's many people that haven't really been in the trenches. They haven't done their 10 years of teaching, and they're putting content online. But I think really one of the best ways to regulate, Braden would always say this, is to regulate tennis teaching. Imagine if someone showed up and they said, okay, I want to see your beginners. I want to see the people who have only played, a year or less. Braden, you said, I'd like to see the person who takes the ice cream cone and puts it in the middle of their forehead. How are they hitting the ball? Because what's taking place too much in junior tennis is based on recruitment now. I mean, I understand that to be in college tennis. In college tennis, okay, you're recruiting successful junior players. But that's where parents will bop and shop, and it's like looking for Baskin Robbins. How many different flavors do you have to try before okay, this is the one for my forehand, my backhand.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of marketing involved in that aspect. So I guess for the club level players, I mean, let's say that they, technically one of their strokes is just has a few different pieces kind of being executed inefficiently. I mean, would you go back to that approach of like not even going on the court and doing like shadow swings and things like that? Like, what's your approach and advice for somebody who wants to retool their stroke? They're committed to not going out and playing tournaments for a while. Like what are the steps they should take?
I think it's a great question. I think there's no off season in tennis. It goes 12 months. Even with adult players, say a recreational 3.5 player, they go from one season to the next. And so, just sit down with someone and say, okay, why don't you take this season from your team off, but educate the whole team and teach them how to have practice sessions. I remember way back in the 70s working for a company called All American Sports. I was very, very young and inexperienced, but I was supposed to run wine and cheese round robins. We teach tennis all day, and in the evening a round robin. It was just instruction, destruction. But I grew up in I grew up in sports and go, this doesn't make any sense. So we had wine and cheese. I had to throw some beers in for these adult campers, and we practiced in the evening. And one of the first times the first time I was in Japan, I remember the very first thing I ever saw in Japan was at the airport, looked out the window, and there's a group of employees that are working in the airfield, and they're in a big circle, and they're doing exercises before they start. They're doing jumping jacks, and I go, whoa, that's a little bit different. But in adult tennis, if a tennis teaching professional goes out, I've made this mistake before because I teach so many juniors. So I'm doing an adult clinic, and I go, all right, let's jog a couple laps, get the body temperature up, and then we'll stretch. And everyone just says, they just look at me, because adult tennis in America, juniors don't, excuse me, I should say adults don't run a couple laps around the court. I remember a group of women that would go in the sauna with their tennis clothes on for a couple of minutes ago. This was up north where there's a lot of snow. It's like, okay, we've got to get warm. And they stand in the sauna for a few minutes. But no, I think you have to just sit down. And we worked with quite a few adults. It's pretty interesting, where they figured out, if we work with you, because if we work with somebody 3-5 and they come and train with us and train like a junior, we can have them be a 4-5 if they were to do follow the pathway that we recommend. But we've had definitely close to a dozen adults go, I don't want to do this. I keep practicing this way. If I'm a 4-5, I have less people to play with. If you're a 3-5, tennis is much more social than if you're a 4-5. But I think the biggest thing is to come back with injury. Is that you're serving this way, and it's just there's a very good chance that you can have tendonitis and be struggling. So, but I think that if people knew that, so they're on an adult team, and they, the captain of the team, the coach of the team, okay, this group's or these 2 or 3 players are going to take some time off and work on their game, that they can reposition themselves. They're not totally out. Years ago, college freshmen couldn't play. Stan Smith, Arthur Ashe. I share that with people all the time, that it was a developmental year. Now college kids, it's just so extreme the other way. They're really, really top kids. Some of them, they don't show up until January. And that's really, there's no development in that. The coach reloads in January. It says, okay, we got this kid in. So, but I just think sitting down and talking to people and going, hey, this is a sport of a lifetime. Vic used to always say, if you're 15, that means you have 75 years to work on your game until you play in the 90 and overs. So but I do think people are very fearful. And there's 2 sides to it. So, okay, I'm going to take 10 steps back to take 100 steps forward. But can the person helping you really help you? Like I would tell people, I think I could take a lawnmower apart, but I don't think I could put it back together. Yeah, I could take it apart. And I think it's the same with strokes, is that I had a gal work for me one time where Jennifer Roberts, and she told me, she was very young, we're both young. And she said, I really haven't got people to hit the ball better. And I think people are very pretentious that they've actually developed players. And that's another thing too, is that the consumer not having consumer knowledge, it's amazing how many people get prestigious jobs because they can play. I mean, no one's asking Bill Belichick, tell us about your playing career. How far can you punt the football? And so tennis has some challenges.
Yeah, 100%, Steve. So I do get this question a lot, and I understand it kind of varies based on what you're working on. But I mean, I think somewhere on your website, you had that repetition is the mother of skill and success. So, I mean, generally speaking, I mean, what, how much time is it going to take for us to revamp, a stroke, or any just advice, like generally about that for amateurs?
Well, repetition. I have some answers. They're just tip of my tongue. When someone asks me, and I'm asked quite often, how long will it take me to change my strokes?
Right.
And I say a little less than the ice age. Because if you're asking me how long it's going to take to change your strokes, you're not thinking about changing your strokes. You're thinking about how long it will take. And, pandemic has changed some things, but in the course of a year, we have people come from here, there, and everywhere to work with us. And it's a pretty captive audience. They fly, they get off an airplane, and we actually film the players playing. We film all their essential strokes from different angles. We put them through skills tests, but someone is, for the most part, sent them to work with us. So that's a little bit different. I think when you are working with someone in a different capacity, like say a typical club, or someone just takes a tennis lesson, is, you can work with someone gradually. You could Band-Aid and make this change first, and then see how that goes, and then we can add to it. Dennis Vander was always clever on the forehand, where years ago people were taught, take the racket up high if you're an advanced player because you need a loop. But if you're a beginner, you have to take the racket straight back. So there were some issues that people were stuck on years ago, loop versus straight back. And the beginners were told, oh, you go straight back. But then we know now that the brain doesn't work that way. No such thing for little strokes. No such thing as little strokes for little folks. But Dennis would just say, well, let's add to your game. If you keep the racket head up high, you'll be able to hit a drop shot. You'll be able to have disguise, plus you'll have racket hit speed. So when we tell people you got to buy a cone, you got to buy a foam ball, you have to hit it off a cone, they start to look at you cross-eyed. But for 15 years, I taught in Tampa at a tennis school right next to where the Yankees have spring baseball. And they have a swing coach who could have been a superstar like a Derek Jeter, and he's got a ball on a tee, and the coach is next to him. And tennis players become indignant. You're telling me to hit up a cone? Then the baseball player gets in an on-deck circle, like a Michael Jordan gets at the foul line, and you see him shadow swinging this movement. Getting someone to practice in front of a mirror. We make films for players, narrated slow motion analysis, and it's a little disheartening, a little discouraging that, less than 15% of the kids, they're supposed to watch it 3 times and send us notes. They really have to take responsibility. It's the human spirit, it's willpower. Change is difficult, but you got to meet it head on. And, that's where, like, say, a college coach, because, it's in this society, tennis circles today, could you get a blue chipper to come in and not play as a freshman? But I do think that, coming back to college tennis, how many college teams have really had somebody make money playing pro tennis? But to sort of put things in perspective, there will always be tournaments. And I do think that kids like, well, how am I going to improve my UTR? Tournaments. I get pros mad at me because I think a lot of pros are telling kids, go play tournaments, because many teaching pros, and I know so many work so hard, but there's a lot of teaching pros that, they have it pretty light on the weekend, but they work their juniors Monday through Friday, and they're having fun doing all these game-based drills Monday through Friday. And then you say, ready, play, and they go to the tournament, not so good. You really want to have your kids unhappy Monday through Friday, and they go to the tournament and they're very happy. You get kids to work on technique, they're going to complain to mom and dad. And if the kid's complaining to mom and dad, generally that means it's a really good practice. If they love practice, it just means it's probably pretty much a bad practice. You go to club after club and they're doing the same drill, where I know you as a player did this and it was fun. 2 players on one side, maybe even 6 to 8 players on the other side, feed in an approach shot, played out. If you win that, you tag up to the baseline, feed in a volley, win that, tag up, feed a lob, win that, then you run over to the other side. I share that all the time. College tennis coaches do that some as a warm up. Now, if people have been taught to hit the ball really well, it's a great drill. But if not, it's just happy, busy, good. People think happy, busy, good, but it's just organized chaos.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that because there's a, what do you call it? Like a social event every Friday that's hosted around here. And that's the hands down the favorite thing to do out of all the different things is like like Russian crush and drills like that.
Yeah.
But, I think the crowd there is more in it just to have fun on Fridays more than develop their game, I think.
But, from where you're from, that area, I spent some time with Junior Ore.
Oh, yeah.
I watched, he came and spent 4 months with me. I mean, I've watched Kudla play many times. My son, Connor, he played Kudla. He was 2 points away. He missed a sitter to have match point, but that guy is very, very good. Top 50, 60 in the world. There was one other, if Tiafoe's younger, help me out. He's from that same group.
Franklin?
Mitchell Franklin. But if you took the three of them and said, okay, we're going to take Junior Ore's speed, we're going to take Mitchell Frank's mental toughness, we're going to take Kudla's ball striking, you'd have a big time player. For me, and again, I don't know Tiafoe, but I was around him for a couple of weeks because my son was playing the same matches, and I know they played doubles together before and such. And he's doing great, but he's great. When he first came out, seeing 15 here in the 18 Orange Bowl, I was like, hey, this guy could be the real deal. This guy could be the next American to win a major. And he's a big time player, but he's got some holes in his game. I think Andy Roddick, I liked how he said that Roger Federer's an artistic technician. I just hit the crap out of the ball. I used to say this is Andy Roddick, his game is Swiss cheese, and Roger Federer's game is American cheese. Andy's game, and he's the first one to say it, he's got a lot of holes in it. Years ago, they had an academy, and I went there to train the coaches a couple times when John owned it, but he had hired somebody that I trained to run it. Then later, the Roddicks sold it to a group of pros that I worked with. And Andy wasn't really in San Antonio where the academy was. He was in Austin. But he's very vocal. I mean, my volley sucks. And, he was in a Wimbledon final 3 times. But I was never around Roddick. But, I should say I never coached Roddick, but I was around Roddick a bunch. Somebody who's very famous in tennis now for all the hard work and all the great things he does, Craig Tiley. Tiley was a student of ours, and it's a great story. So he's at the tournament. It's in Wichita Falls, the Texas Sectionals, so hot. And John Roddick, we were on this small program in Tyler, Texas, and we thought we had 4 kids who could win. And there's no 10s at that time, just 12, 16s, 12s, 14, 16, 18s. John beat one of our players. And I said to Tyler, tell me about this kid, John Roddick. I haven't seen him play yet. And, John would know these names like Clayton Stanley and Chad Clark, people that we coached. They both did quite well. Both played at Texas, actually. And I remember Tylee saying to me, well, John Roddick's really good, but his brother's going to be amazing. I said, why is that? He goes, well, it was over 100 degrees every day. And all he did is hit the backboard the entire time. Didn't stop hitting the backboard until someone walked by to hand in the balls at the tournament desk. And he was kind of in their face, all juiced up, like, who won? What was the score? And the person would tell him who won, what the score was, and he'd go back to hitting the backboard. So those are the things. I like the story behind the story. We do study technique. People come to see us for technique, but I'm really intrigued by the character of tennis, the backstory, how do people become so good? And I don't think it's just nuts and bolts of forehands and backhands by any means.
Yeah. So you can kind of tell like when a young player is like super into it and just doesn't want to stop playing, that they're going to be really, really good.
Well, Nick Baltieri, I would put myself in the top 10 in the world. I may be a crummy tennis teacher, but I put myself right now for the top 10 people in the world for how many hours I've taught tennis. I've taught a bunch of hours, and like 48 years of it. And I worked some long days. I don't think anyone has seen more tennis families that have the desire to have their child or their children become great players. No, so you can tell when you meet the family, hungry dog hunts best. I mean, do they really understand what it's going to take? And that's why there's so many immigrants that are great players. Their parents were learning a new language, a new way in a new country. And so I think, Nick, deservingly so, he's in the Hall of Fame based on the environment he put together. Like a Braden and a Vandermeer, they got in the Hall of Fame based on not environment created, but education.
How does somebody who hasn't been through, like, let's say, hardships of, an immigrant, let's say, how do they kind of recreate almost, the type of hunger and desire that's really needed to push themselves towards, the pinnacle of what they can achieve?
Well, common sense. I mean, common sense is dying. The first time I ever heard this, I'm sure my oldest brother heard it from someone else, but it's very difficult to have rich parents and poor kids. John McEnroe stole this from someone, affluenza. I mean, do kids really need to have an upgrade on their cell phone? When I go into a place like Panera, in fact, I was with Andy Fitzell at Panera today, and when it's a nice coffee shop and you go in with your group of tennis players and there's teenagers on the other side of the counter, I think you have to stop and say, like Billie Jean King, tennis is a privilege. And, you have to teach the life lessons. For someone in the States, here in Florida, especially in this Boca Raton area, there's so many clay courts. Juniors don't sweep clay courts. Juniors go to a tournament and don't roll dry. If you're overseas or in Sweden studying tennis, and I was told, it's a fun story. I was told I was in Germany and the Swedes were doing so well. And this was when Borg had taken some time off from tennis. The Swedes had 6 players in the top 10 in the world at one time. So that was my first trip to Sweden, and I was told to take bottles of booze because booze is so expensive. So with Mark Hamill, we drive up from northern Germany, take 2 cases of booze. And so this one guy was so nice to us, hey, come out of the car, I got a gift for you. So I give him 2 bottles of whatever, gin. And he said, hey, this is great. Why don't you come back tonight? And Borg is, he's practicing. And it was during Wimbledon, the first Wimbledon, he was not playing it. But Borg's done and Dahl's done hitting tennis balls. They're sweet courts. The tennis profession is service-based. It's not education-based. I went to Czechoslovakia to study tennis. I was just amazed that the juniors, this was in 87, the juniors were getting all the balls up. Practice was over. The juniors put all the equipment away. The juniors swept and lined the courts. So I think we have a lot of things backwards. You can be at a junior tournament and just take a survey. When a match is over, how many kids stretch? The match is over, they're going to stretch. And then take another survey. How many times is the parent carrying the bag? And if you want to eavesdrop a little bit, is the kid saying, I want to go to Chick-fil-A. I want. You can ask some kids today, what's it mean to brown bag it? And they don't know that means to pack a lunch. We had Harry Hopman with Australia, he's asked what happened to Australian tennis. And he said, well, we became affluent. When I was a kid, even wealthy kids would work a summer job. I do think that's where tennis is year round. Years ago, kids would play 3 sports, Maribon, and you're playing a seasonal sport. But you had jobs where you mow your neighbor's yard, you rake leaves, and so people need to learn how to work. I've met, I'd like to say it's for every junior player I've met 2 parents. Now it's not always that way, but then I've met a lot more parents than I have players, and I've learned so much by parents. I should write a book on parenting. I know one parent who had the idea that their child had to help the mom with household chores to earn points to play in tournaments. It's kind of like Dobson's book, Dare to Discipline. They do it in kindergarten. Say, okay, here's a chart. There's the attitude or the effort, attitude, and the reward. You get a little sticker on your lunch pail or whatever. But no, I just don't think that we're clever enough. I think there's a big difference between intelligence and cleverness. The tail, in junior tennis, many times the tail is wagging the dog. I told a story last night, this young player from El Paso came to work with me, and I was with Carlin Navarro, who knows this young boy. And I said, I'll tell you a story. So it was back when people were they all had red Wilson bags. But at one point they came out with a black and gold bag. So this kid comes in, I've never met him before, but he's flown in to work with me. And I just told his mom, I said, your son's boycotting. So what are you talking about? I said, he wants a new bag. He's telling you that his red bag, it's just faded. He's just telling you it's torn and he can't use it anymore. He's carrying all his rackets because he wants the black and gold Wilson bag. She looked at me like, how do you know? Well, I know without knowing because I've been in the kid business since I was a kid. And, young kids are going to have, I think young kids should just have a flip phone. Why do they, have to have all the bells and whistles on a phone? The parents really should police it. Parents don't realize that, their kid can't break an 8-minute mile and they've got their 5 hours a day on a screen. And yet they're telling you that they want to play national level tennis. So that's one of the reasons that the players, I spent a lot of time in Europe, and you go to the under 14s, for example, and countries that are not as wealthy are producing better players. Years ago, the French were spending the most, and they asked Jack Kramer, we spend more money on tennis than anyone. What's our problem? And he said, your answer's in the question. Aside from that, the French, that's where the UTR system, they have a great competitive system, but the countries with all the money, the 4 Grand Slams, in the end, how are they doing with player development? Not so good. Not so good. And that's, really there's a better chance of a family producing a tennis player than a federation. All you got to do is study, like, how did this happen? We saw Coco Gauff the other day, and now she's connected with Patrick Mortogulu, but I coached this young kid for years, Victor Lilov, and they're the same age. So I'd be at a tournament, and when you're at a tournament and, it's the semis, it's the finals, there's not many people left around. And, but I've always been intrigued by her work ethic. And then you get on YouTube and just look it up, you got to dig, but how hard she worked physically. So she could have a much better game technically, but she is a warrior. She's an athlete, competitor, 17 years old, and it looks like she's done 20 years of fitness. So.
Yeah. I got to watch her up close at the City Open. There was like a women's invitational because they took the WTA tournament away from it, but just really amazed by her power at such a young age. I also got to see Raven as well win the doubles for a second time in a row, I think. Speaking of that, I was curious, with Raven, you mentioned that you worked on his game and I think his volleys. So like, I'm curious if you could tell us like what exactly you worked on, like with those specifically.
Well, same thing with the process. Love the process. Process will love you. Is that someone comes in, he came in with PJ Damdo. They were both 1 and 2 in South Africa. At that time, Craig Tiley, we were working on it with a very wealthy man who was sponsoring boxers. And he had a business called GoPro International. So, Raven was recommended, and he came to us, and he didn't play for 6 months. When he came in, we knew he was going to be with us for a long period of time. We knew he wasn't going to go to college. So, I tell Raven, tell everybody you're both a tennis player and a tennis teacher. Pretty confident that he's one of the best tennis teachers on the ATP tour, because teaching is information transfer. And we said, okay, let's evaluate your game. At that time, someone who was a year younger, Ryler DeHart, is somebody we coached for a long, long time. And so when they first played, DeHart was a better player, but we documented it. We still have all that on film. So, it's some strokes, it was a complete overhaul. We say that was surgery, and then some strokes is a Band-Aid. But coming back to one of your earlier questions, I wouldn't be a very good college coach, because I would go to junior tournaments and I would say, you need to come to our program because we'll teach you how to hit a serve, forehand, a backhand, and a volley. You need to improve everything. And a lot of times they wine and dine and they romance the player and say, we want you and we have Nike and, we're going to play this schedule. Excuse me. It's even at the point where Maribon, they're saying, well, your first fall, what we'll do is we'll send you to pro tournaments. And I would say what we're going to do your first fall is you're not going to play. We're going to go back to basics. And no, it's definitely a process, but you want to always be teaching people to be a self-coach. You always want to teach people to be an independent thinker and a problem solver. Again, you don't really do that in the early childhood development classes, but I mean, if you tell kids, okay, your swing's a merry-go-round and the ball rotates like a Frisbee. I mean, you could be 6 years old, 7 years old and go, okay, the ball is going this way. Get this swing to go like a Ferris wheel, rotate like a bicycle tire. Kids can understand that. So, say for example, we talked to a dad today, his son's a very good tennis player, Arush Ganji. He's not quite at 12 and, certainly there's things with the pandemic and, you never could play, the level ones and level twos. Just here recently, his parents have been in the country for a long time, but they didn't have the paperwork. They weren't residents. So, you play with someone, I should say you coach someone and he's played 3-5 years where he hasn't gone forward. One of the players that he was trained with is Spencer Johnson. And he went years where he didn't lose one set to Spencer Johnson. And you keep telling him, say he's forcing and you're not. So you can do situational training, say, okay, everybody has to serve the ball. Okay, you don't have to play set and the ball and hit ground strokes. But the brain has two sets of motor programming, one with stress and one without. So when you say ready, play, we're going to play a set, kids just tighten up. And so it's just so sad. I think that's what a problem with years ago was USTA ratings and tennis recruiting and now UTR. Kids are so tight. They're so result oriented. You send a group of kids to go play soccer, then afterwards you're going to go to lunch. They don't even remember who they played with. They were arguing about what happened during the soccer game. But you send a group of kids to play some sets, and then when you go to lunch, they come back, they know what the score was with every player. We quote Roger Federer all the time. I didn't know you were supposed to win in practice. So I think you really have to sit down with people and go, this is long-term vision. I think in the States, we make a mistake even on the academic side is young student athletes, they don't see a college campus till they're in the 11th grade. I mean, they should be seeing college campuses in the 6th grade. We know, your transcript, that's what you have to submit when you're applying to college, grade 9. But I used to say that Jewish moms are the best coaches in the world. They cultivate achievement. You're going to be a doctor, lawyer, accountant, or you will die. The book, The Battle Hymn of the Mother Tiger, I tease Chinese moms. I go, is it piano or violin? It's definitely math. One year I made videos for people are like, oh, it's so racial. I said, no, it's not. I made videos, it was for more than 1 year, but for a series of years, I made videos for all the Harvard players and on the women's side. And one year they only had one girl that didn't have an Asiatic background. So it's no different than math, people don't get so excited that your kid is first on the multiplication tables. I actually was first on the multiplication tables. People thought I was going to be really good at math, but I peaked in the 3rd grade. And it's just crazy. But, say a kid plays the trombone or he plays the violin and he's in elementary school, it's really the burden of the parent. Okay, we got to go listen to this. I mean, there's no tickets. It's not like people are dying to get in. I mean, some kids learning to play a horn. It's like, oh, you don't want to be in the room. Perspective. So if some kid plays chess and they lose, they just know that the other kid's a better chess player. But in tennis, for some reason, they think, well, I lost today, but I'll beat him tomorrow. The macho male ego, you played college tennis. Some kid is number 2 in his dorm room, and next year he thinks he could be number 1 in the world. And it's insanity. Einstein, he's going to do the same thing over and over again. He's going to make no changes and expect to have a different result. Mm-hmm. So I think to be straight up with a kid, Vandermeer was a genius. He would feed 10 balls to a target. And then another player would just mark down where the 10 shots would land. And you hear other expressions, like say in basketball, if that kid was in a boat He couldn't hit water. In other words, he can't hit a shot. But tennis kids they're just not really told, hey, you have no forehand. And there's a lot of kids they go through junior tennis and they think their forehand is their go-to shot. Then they find out that your forehand is not very good. But that's all they hit. They don't hit backhands. It's amazing how many kids will run around a backhand today. And I go, I think you should be able to hit a backhand down the road. And I think it's an injustice where they're 9, 10, 11 years old and they think and somebody's talking about the modern game and play like the pros. And that doesn't take place in other sports. Well, this is how Nadal hits it. This is how Federer hits it. And a lot of the coaches that are saying that, they really don't know how Nadal hits it. Federer hits it. Nadal had a two-hand forehand when he was playing in the 12s. People should know that. There's not, people aren't really looking at the film of, let's say, what did Roger do when he was a little kid learning how to play? But we've done homework on that. And it's not so easy to say, okay, this is what happened. But how did so-and-so teach tennis? Sandy Mayer and Gene Mayer were both top 10 in the world. Dr. Alex Mayer, he built a contraption on the garage. We have one on top of a backboard that we built, or a regular hitting wall. So the kids would have to hit up, just like a baseball player would throw the ball up on the roof. They have nobody to play catch with. They throw the ball on the roof. The ball rolls down, they catch it, and they throw it back. The baseball kids would just throw a ball into the glove like this. So he was clever, and he had his kids lifting up. He used to teach the lob first. And you teach the lob because the racket head's going way up. Well, I get a little bit annoyed when I hear, old school, new school. There is no school. And there should be an appreciation for the tennis teachers from the past. It's like this kid, Sam Rifus, what a class kid. It's not taking anything away from him, but to speculate, Jimmy Connors 50 years ago, it was 1970, so it wasn't quite 50 years ago. I think he won it in 70. So yeah, it was 51 years ago. He wins the NCAAs. Sam plays Jimmy. Not that Sam had to play with a T2000, but they played with the same equipment. Who wins? And, Jimmy, it wasn't so big on the serve, but, it's like Andy Roddick plays Jimmy Connors. Who wins? Jimmy would nullify the power of his serve, and then Jimmy wins. You just have a checklist. Who's got a better forehand? Who's got a better backhand? Who's a better mover? And they're both mental giants, but you'd have to even give the edge to Connors. But, the balls are being hit about 2 times slower in a rally. But that's where people are playing with a wooden racket. So when people look at players from the past, they what they did won't work today. Chrissy Everett was born in 1954. So she's no spring chicken, but she can just hit the ball deep. Like she said, when she came on the tour, no one, it's like a Chrissy Everett quote, when I came on the tour, no one could hit ground strokes. And it's true that people were wrong with the grip on the forehand. But they were playing on bad grass. They're playing in rain. The grass would be very slick and people would be wearing spikes and people were going to the net on all costs. But I think that tennis, for example, we do understand that the forehand should be hit differently today. But now it's the only shot. People, maybe even to a certain degree, people are playing on TV. But it's like you go watch a junior tournament and it's like the kid's got one shot. They're just trying to rip forehands. And if they're a little bit more athletic or they're in the 12s and they've had an earlier growth spurt, it comes back to, this is sad. It really, again, it's upsetting to me that people are taught poorly. And that's what we're trying to do with, giving out free content. And I think with Andy's work the last 2 years is that, now with him helping out so much, it used to be called Steve Smith stuff. Use my name in third person, but it's not Steve and Andy's stuff. There's a lot of homework that's been done, but you shouldn't judge the end finished product. People want to microwave tennis. I got that term from a South African mom. She brought her child to work with me for a long time. She said, you don't microwave tennis. It's more like a holiday meal. You have to take your time to really train a tennis player.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Steve, as far as the forehand versus the backhand, what's the reason why tennis players' backhand are so lacking in comparison to the forehand? Is it because we just hit more forehands, or is there any other sort of like scientific or biomechanical explanation for that?
Well, I think there's lots of explanations. You go to Daniel Quayle's book, The Talent Code, they're building myelin through repetition. The kids just hit forehands, and they're a product of repetition. The backhand and forehand, the principles are the same. A two-handed backhand for a right-hander is a left-handed forehand. The shoulder housing they hit, you can play the ball later, hitting a forehand, but therefore you can pull off top if you can play the ball a little bit later, so a little more forgiving. But what happens, Mirabon, is, say, for example, I'm right-handed, the ball's coming to the backhand corner. My first instinct is to start to turn this way for a forehand. And I can't quite get to hit a forehand, and now I'm going to hit a backhand. Again, coming back to Stevie Johnson, just watching him play. They're in the finals of Cincinnati. I was really surprised. First set, 3, it was a receiver's choice. And Austin and Stevie, they lefty-righty combination. They could have the forehands in the middle. And his backhand going cross court would have been more forgiving. But for him to try to hit an inside-out backhand, Craig Boyne, when he was working with him, had him hitting underspin. And, we always ask trick questions. Okay, kid, what's better, top spin or underspin? What shot lands deeper? People didn't like playing against Steffi Graf's underspin backhand because not many people hit an underspin backhand. So simply, they don't hit it. Years ago, people had better backhands because there was too many times people were told one grip, even the genius of Welby Van Horn. I don't know if anybody had a better system for teaching beginners, but Welby, who I spent time with till he was in the 90s in a nursing home, he used to call the forehand grip the beginner grip, and then he would change it to championship grip because 3 out of the 4 Grand Slams were on grass, people playing wooden rackets. But people should look at the best. Look at Djokovic. Look at Agassi. Gilbert said about Agassi, his backhand's a gift of God. Agassi was asked, why don't you go to the net more? Braden asked him that because he would do so well. He was 36 years old, and he was really hitting through Nadal. But with Nadal's fitness, Agassi had to win a point 2-3 times. Vic said, Andre, why didn't you come in to volley? And Andre said, have you seen me volley? So like a Jim Courier, granted, that was his game. And he even called his company, maybe he still does, Inside Out. He just works so hard. He's so competitive. I was told by Ron Woods, who ran player development at one time, 2 Ron Woods in tennis, but Ron Woods from New Jersey, not Ron Woods from Texas. And he said, well, if you put a wheelbarrow with millions of dollars in it, and Sampras would step back and go, okay, I'm going to find a way to go over the wall. Or Jim Courier would just put his head down and go right through the wall. But I think that's the shot that they hit. The term Finnish points, that's a Finnish player. Now you think it's a Scandinavian country. We used to say years ago, that's a Finnish player. They could finish at the net. And we used to also say years ago, the way that kid's playing, it won't work in the 18s, but now it does. I asked juniors that come visit me, okay, you're from the Intermountain, you're from this section, that section. Tell me someone, say they're 16, 17 years old. Tell me somebody in your section who plays serve and volley doubles. Tell me someone, that's we always tell people, one of the toughest things about being a serve and volleyer in doubles is to find a partner who serves and volleys. But, you ask a kid, they're in the 18s and they're hard pressed to name somebody in their section who occasionally serves and volleys. It's just lost arts. So, people get power by hitting away from their body. So people are confident moving away from their body, like a Jack Sock, Austin Gonzalez. So he beats Jack at Kalamazoo in the 16s. My son Connor was coaching him, but I was helping him out. I didn't say one word to his friend, Gonzalez Austin. But Jack Sock, he loves to move he's a righty. He loves to move to his left. What you need to do is go high and heavy to the right and make those type of players hit forehands. And you can go high because generally they don't volley, or if they do volley, they have poor grips and poor mechanics, poor swings. So it's like Connors had lost love and love to Lendl. tournament champions. But he also, after that, beat Lendl twice at the US Open. And, Connors weighs 155 pounds. He goes right up to Lendl in the locker room, points his finger at him, goes, "I'm coming right at your forehand." You really have to be able to go to someone's strength to exploit their weakness. I don't think that young players sit around and talk about tennis. I mean, I know they don't. On the pro tour, they're talking about fantasy football. They're talking maybe about some investments. They're not really. It's not a think tank. You would think, and I remember learning this from Braden years ago, that all of a sudden you're around players that are playing big time tennis. Last night we were watching Kevin Anderson. He went to Illinois where, Tylee was, and we think of, John Lopton-Diago, who worked with us. He's been a Davis Cup coach, or Jeff Coetzee, Raven Klaassen. We're just watching, and he's got 4 people talking to him. Like, okay. And he's a great player. He's been a Wimbledon finalist. He's been a US Open finalist. He's serving out of a tree, and he's not the best mover. That goes right back to, I do think that if Tylee had stayed at Illinois, he would have got Anderson, if you could kept him there for 4 years, he would have got Anderson going to the net more. You just speculate. The guy is a great, great tennis player, but what would have taken Kevin Anderson to get one more step further? Just like you mentioned, Francis Tiafoe, when he's 15 years old. Years ago, someone like a Pancho Seguro, who coached Connors, you think of people like Jack Kramer, they would just say, "Hey, kid." Jack Kramer was the best 18-year-old in America. And, now when he was done, his father said, "Okay, now you got to play a man's game." And so it's fascinating. But, John Wooden, the great basketball coach, the legend, never mentioned the word winning. You'll love Virginia Wade's quote. I don't, with beautiful tennis, winning tennis. Winning tennis doesn't lead to beautiful tennis, but beautiful tennis will lead to winning tennis. Roger Federer, we talk about brain typing. He's knee and TP. He's a planner. Braden asked him, "Roger, what'd you do to become so good?" He goes, "I made a list. I made a list of all the shots I wanted to hit." And he also said it was important to him to be a good-looking player. I don't think that Andy Roddick or Jim Courier were thinking that. Roddick is inducted into the Hall of Fame, and Courier's sitting behind him, and he goes, and Roddick is a great speaker, a great comedian. He pokes at himself a little bit and says, "I might be the worst player who's ever got into the Hall of Fame." And he goes, "But I feel comfortable because Jim Courier's sitting behind me, and he also had a crappy backhand."
Yeah.
So I think that the sound bites that you get courtside, the players are so wired, they're so focused. What you hear a player say courtside being interviewed, it's better if you can go back and listen to what's going on in the press conference. But even then, I'd love to just listen to the players. What do they have to say about what's going on? Roger Federer, if you don't have a volley, if you don't volley well, you won't go to the net. And he actually said it at a time, a day after he won Wimbledon. He said that Roger slipped up a little bit. Perfect Roger said, "Well, I feel good now, but last night I mixed my drinks a little bit." So he had partied the night before winning Wimbledon. And then he left his guard down because he said, "It's frightening how low the level of play is at Wimbledon. I know that less than 2% of the time my opponents are coming to net behind their serve. And it's grass." So I think tennis, because it's man on man, we do this drill called the tiebreaker test. Kids come in and they're top 10, top 20 in their section. They have to hit 6 shots at designated targets. And many times they're 07-07, courtesy feed. So they get up to the net, say, "Okay, can you hit a volley cross court in the service box?" And granted, it's their first day meeting us, and there's a camera on them. And they again, it comes back to that. They can't hit the broadside of a barn. But I think that there's way too much marketing in tennis. This is the elite program. This is the world-class program. Now, I do have some people I'm talking to, and it's a privilege to talk to, that have listened to me for years. So ice hockey, when you're become a 11, 12-year-old, you become a peewee. You're in the peewee tournament. The year before, you're in the sport division. but there's still way too much marketing. Where I'm in the high performance group. Coaches, I think I've said this enough where people have told me they like it. It's a funny joke is that, they introduce themselves to me. They say, hi, I'm Joe. I'm a high performance coach. I shake their hand and say, I'm Steve. I'm a low performance coach. We should have tournaments for who can teach beginners. And in all fairness to most college tennis players, and they run camps, most college tennis players are not lost. Most college tennis coaches, tennis players too, because the players should be able to give back to the game. They should be taught to teach. But most college coaches, they would be totally lost to teach beginners. One of my fans is Ty Tugger at Ohio State. I really like Ty. Ty is honest though. He's just going to tell you that's not what I do. And he's great at what he does, and it's amazing how many matches he's won. But in that case, it's like, well, if I'm going to have a camp, for years and years, he hasn't had a camp. That's a responsibility too, is that I think straight across the board, and that's for American tennis to get better. I like the question you asked about regulating tennis. Is I think the USTA needs to reinvent itself. They should spend little or no money on player development. They didn't start in player development until 1987. And it should be spent on education. We need to get to the point where it's not so expensive, to teach a parent high, inside out. It's not all that complicated. We need to do a better job with the content that we have. One of our critics said, and I think you have to listen to your critics, is that it's like drinking water from a fire hose. Mm-hmm. But if someone were just to watch our course, tennis flight is long. That was Man Flanagan, who runs like 5 or 6 places down here. He was a student of ours. And he was a camp director at Harvard. And what he did with our tennis intelligence applied is he just took, like, say, 100 clips instead of 365 clips. You'll be a summer tennis instructor. You don't need to know the ins and outs of charting a match. But, and I think that's an injustice in tennis too, is that typically at a club, you're going to see the inexperienced teachers are with the young kids. Mm-hmm. Yep. You're going to see people who can play the game well. They're former players. They get a prestigious job, and they're going to be at the weekend tournaments. They're going to hand out business cards, and their parents are going to fall for it hook, line, and sinker. Like, this is going to accelerate the process. In boxing, a sparring partner, they wear a mouth guard and helmet. They don't say anything. A sparring partner in tennis, they're paid too much money, and then they think they have something to say, so they say it. And they should just be a sparring partner. I'm really wondering how this USTR hit. I mean, what's it called? Paid hit. You're familiar with that?
Vaguely, yeah.
The UTR has a program now that, so like, say a mom can call up a kid who's got a UTR 11, maybe their kid's a UTR 8, and they can pay the UTR 11. I don't know the ins and outs of it. Maybe they have to be over 16, and I think they do. They have to go through some profiling to make sure that it's not going to be problematic. But we need to have tennis become a sport again in America. It's too much of a business. Too much of a business.
100% agree with that, Steve. Appreciate all the insight there too. So, couple closing questions I want to ask you. One is 3 books. I know you've studied the game, so much, and you probably have like 50 books in your head. But what are 3 books that you would gift a friend who's an amateur tennis player to help them improve their game?
I was asked about this the other day. It's difficult to find, but Teaching Children the Vic Braden Way. That would be one for sure. If you could find a copy of Tennis for the Future or Tennis 2000, Tennis 2000 is an updated version. All the information that's in Tennis for the Future or Tennis 2000 is in the book Teaching Children the Vic Braden Way. With, I think, Daniel Coyle's book, The Talent Code. Why are they're just small pockets of places, where, I'm asked, okay, tell me an achievement. We were in Tyler, Texas for 10 years. The second 5 years of that program, we had around 10 students, and they're just guinea pigs that we were teaching as we were teaching tennis teachers. And that second 5 years, we produced more state champions in Dallas and Houston combined. So I don't really think that all the self-help books, Jim Lair, I think, his books, you go way back to Ideal Performance State. He did so many things, journals for parents, but full engagement or total engagement, actually that's the title, total engagement, or storytelling for mental toughness. So, anything by Lair, by Braden, and then I think Coyle, those three authors, that would be good. Coyle's got the book that a follow-up. We tell every kid they should have in their shoulder bag, the Little Book of Talent. It's 52, basically short pages. I mean, you could read the book in, 45 minutes, but just, okay, I'm going to take it out of my bag and I'm going to read one every day. I could read at least one, maybe the beginning of practice, end of practice, you read two. And then, it just needs to become part of your DNA. It's just the basic things. We tell kids, why don't you do 10 minutes of yoga 3 times a week? Why don't you have a chart? If we can measure, can you touch your toes? Get a stopwatch, in your neighborhood, measure how far it is to run 40 yards or 40 meters, 400, your heart rate at rest. Anytime with tennis development, if every time a junior player is with a paid professional, it means they won't be very good. I mean, this comes from Mia Hamm in Daniel Coyle's book, but it's been added to, champions are made when no one's watching. They're bent over at their waist and they're dripping in sweat and they're gasping for air. Motivation means to move. And most tennis players, they don't understand. You won't get what you expect, but you will get what you deserve. And I think really to work smart and work hard. But tennis kids, you ask most tennis kids, what's a library card? They can't even tell you. They can't tell you that. Well, you can go to the library and you can check this book out for free. And a tennis lesson is expensive, and it's really, especially stay in Maryland where your weather is not fantastic year round and you have to pay for the court and the lesson. It's crazy how expensive it is. I think that people should have read this autobiography or that autobiography, but most tennis kids, they're not well read. And again, I don't like to be beating up my profession, but most tennis coaches are not well read. And I mean, with, at the pandemic, I met with John Embry with the USPTA. Mm-hmm. He told me that I should submit a proposal, meet with the board. And that was, just before the pandemic. Vic Braden had an academy for coaches called the USTA. He gave the name that when they asked to the USTA, because at that time the USTA was a USLTA. But just fact-based instruction is that, I tell people, okay, there's 23,000 people in Arthur Ashe Stadium. Now, how many people know the tennis court's 78 feet long? Well, in football, they know it's 100 yards. The game just teaches them that, okay, 10 yards for first down. So you have to sit back and go, okay, why do people know more about football? Granted, there's 22 people on the field and the commentating afterwards. Where did everybody go? But again, you had the question you asked in the toss, take a survey. What's more important, the swing or the toss? With training tennis teachers, do they have the analytical skills to recognize a palm up? Then can they fix a palm up? But, policing the game it's again, very emotional to me. Okay, I'm at a tournament site, but okay, on the 2 back courts, there's a junior clinic and there's 14 kids playing. And I'm going to stay there long enough to chart how many of those kids have a palm up serve, palm up overhead. And unfortunately, Maribon, most of the time it's 14 for 14. And that's where so many people leave tennis. I had a very smart person tell me the other day that he doesn't like pickleball because it's invading tennis. It's not its own sport in the sense it's taking over tennis courts. I'm sure there's all sorts of positives, but I think we've really lost out by not getting seniors my age to play with, say, that's one thing about like a green dot ball on 60-foot courts. We really missed out not getting seniors. I mean, I think too many people are smiling, and it's like they're converting tennis courts as we speak to pickleball. Yeah. That's not a good thing. Not if you're a tennis purist and you're for the good of the game.
Yeah, I definitely have mixed feelings about that one, but overall, definitely sad to see a lot of the courts being taken up. And that happens, to a lot of public ones around me. So great book recommendations, Steve. Appreciate that. And we'll have those in the show notes linked up for you all to check out. Also, just want to give a shout out again to the Great Base Tennis Podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about it and where people can check it out?
No, I should be able to tell you that. For me, we have Great Base Facebook, and I know that it's posted on Great Base Tennis Facebook. I should be able to tell you that, but I don't know how to find it. But we have a website that's free. There's 5 courses on it. There's other reading materials on it, some blogs. We have about 5,000 pages on Great Base Tennis Facebook. One of our students had leukemia, had started it, and he was bedridden. And wow. We unfortunately he didn't survive for very long. And then since his death, we put up something every day. Eric Oberhammer, and then Andy is 500 plus on Instagram. So yeah, I think if you go to you can go to YouTube as well, Great Base Tennis YouTube.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm subscribed to the podcast, so I think if you just search probably on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, I'm pretty sure you can see it there. I was actually just listening to it on my iPhone, so yeah, definitely. Cool. And
we're rookies. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Everybody and their brother has a podcast, but year number 1, I think we covered a lot of ground talking about our pillars. But we want to really solidify it next year coming up. I think that we need to learn and have our podcast be shorter, but we're flattered that people are listening to that.
Yeah, no, you guys are doing a great job, and just keep it up. Appreciate all the great content that it's free and out there for everybody to learn from. So definitely highly encourage everybody to check out the Great Base Tennis Podcast, and we'll also have a link to that as well. Steve, I just can't thank you enough for all your time. I know we've been going for a while, which has been a lot of fun for today's episode. So I just want to thank you, and again, acknowledge you for all the hard work that you've been putting into the game and thinking about how the game can be improved and how we can best help people fulfill their tennis potential and also just generally their potential in life. So appreciate it, Steve, and talk to you again soon, I hope.
Yeah, Maribon, likewise. Thank you. Understand that you're a lawyer by trade. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, still am.
So tennis is your passion. Tennis is your hobby. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I work full time as an attorney, but I just do a lot of side tennis stuff and play a lot. And I'm actually going to play in an hour as well. So yeah, I love it.
That's good. Well, thanks for everything you do for tennis. And next time we talk, I'll tell you a few lawyer jokes. You probably heard all of them.
It's fine. I still love hearing them. So hope to see you.
Jake in said about 500 lawyers at the bottom of the sea.
What about it?
That's a good start.
All right, we're cutting that out, editor. Just kidding. We're gonna keep it in. All right, Steve. Well,
yeah, it's great. I hope your listeners got something out of it.
Oh, I'm sure they did. I mean, I know I did. So thanks again, Steve. Talk to you soon, and have a great one.
All right, everyone. All the best.
You too. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. I hope you really enjoyed my interview with Coach Steve Smith. And if you want to learn more about the Great Base Tennis System, then go to the show notes page, which is where I will have a link to the Great Base website, as well as the Great Base Tennis Podcast with both Steve Smith and Andy Fitzell. So thanks to Steve for coming on to the show. Great to have a fellow podcaster on. And that makes sense why we went for almost 2 hours. Because we both like to do the podcast thing. Alrighty then. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, I would highly, highly appreciate it if you would take a minute or so to leave a review for the Tennis Files podcast. You can do that in Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice that you use to listen to the show. There'll definitely be a review button somewhere in that podcast app that you're using. And I'd also like to leave you with a quote, as I often do at the end of the show, and this one is by H. Jackson Brown Jr., and he said, "When you can't change the direction of the wind, adjust your sails." Love that quote there. So with that, I really appreciate you listening to the show and for all your kind emails and messages of support for the show and for Tennis Files. And we will see you on the next episode of the Tennis Files podcast. Take care.